right, so we are back, and we're here with Jeremiah's talk on roguelike time travel. So just control the arrows,
Okay,
stand
good.
it here, and you'll be ready to go.
Okay, hi, I'm Jeremiah Reid, and this is Roguelike Time Traveling. You may know me from one of my 4 poorly named 7 DRLs, including A False Saint Anonymous Rogue, Golden Krone Hotel, which if I can get off my ass this year, is going to be on Steam Early Access, and Dumazid, probably the most favorite for some reason, and the game I'm going to talk about today, The Only Shadow That the Desert Knows. Also, I'm a time traveler from August 8th, 1986, and if you know anything about dates and math and cheesy science fiction from the 1970s, then you'll know this is kind of like an important weekend for me, so I'm glad I can be here with you. Thank you. So we're going to talk about existing time travel games that are already out there, where I got my ideas for my specific game, how to design time travel, implement it, and how confusing it is, and what you can do with it other than just make a time travel game. So if you go look at the Wikipedia page for time travel games, you'll see there's an absolute boatload of games, including a whole section on Doctor Who related board games. So there's no shortage, but the problem is that these games are limited in very specific ways. And as roguelike enthusiasts, we don't like being limited. We like flexibility and being able to go wherever we want, do whatever we want. And there's no big simulationist games, very few. So there's the narrative games that have basically no time travel mechanics at all, like BioShock Infinite. Cool games like Braid, but all you can do is rewind, really. Or games that have a small time scale, 3 Days in Majora's Mask. Or Chrono Trigger that just has like 7 discrete eras. Screw that. In H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, the guy doesn't think, oh, let me go back 5 minutes in the past. He's like, let me go to the year 800,000 and see what's going on. So why don't we do something more interesting like that? And that's kind of my goal with this game. So here's kind of where I got some of my ideas from. Ultima Radio Regum, I always have problems with that, but by Mark. And my understanding is it's largely a mystery game, and there's the big overarching mystery, but there's also smaller mysteries. And there was this anecdote that I heard that was, I can't track this down, but it was really interesting. It was like, there's a soldier that had a sword or a piece of armor, and if you wanted to go collect it, you could read up on this guy, and you could find out his rank and where he lived in the country and his culture, and you could go track down the specific cemetery that he would have been buried in and find the tombstone and unearth it and get the sword or whatever. I'm like, that is just amazing. Why can't I do that like right now today? And okay, cool. Then kind of was thinking about Lord of the Rings, and you have the ring itself has a really interesting history, forged in the Second Age 1600, and then thousands of years later cut from Sauron's hand and taken, from person to person to person. And, wouldn't it be cool if there was a game where you had to track down items like the ring and they're powerful? And what if you could use time travel to do it? Because wouldn't it be easier to get it from the bottom of a riverbed than it would be to take it from like Bilbo Baggins, who he was kind of mean sometimes. And Game of Thrones, honestly, I've never watched Game of Thrones, but while researching the slide, I was like, I wonder if it has time travel mechanics or time travel elements. And spoilers, apparently it kind of does. So, and the name, so that's just, yeah. So jumping way ahead, the end result kind of looks like this. Is a big thing in the game is procedural books, and the biographies are the most important. So I'm just going to read some of this to you. Free Redclaw was born on 215Y, 29th of Agruna, in the city of Briggy. All the names are procedurally generated, so some of them are kind of out there. Free's parents were Frau Redclaw and Suspria Redclaw. Free married Egram Greenclaw on 232Y. And it continues to go on, and there's a lot of noise here, but the important part is that this person once owned two of the 8 artifacts that you need to kind of complete the game. And it's kind of a weird coincidence that they had the vermin vets, but those are also randomly generated, and the giant splitter. And the important part is if you go down to the bottom, you can see that they went to go kill a monster in like 278Y. And I'm kind of thinking of like, Beowulf style. They're like, we're going to go off to slay this monster, and we're going to, go get it. But if you look, they died in 280Y, which based on kind of the distances and the turns, that they died at the bottom of that dungeon. And if you go to that dungeon, if you cross-reference the name of the monster with another book, you can find the cave that the monster lives in, and then you have to discover the cave, and then if you go to the bottom of the cave, well, you might not find anything, but if you time travel back to 280Y, you can get the item. And that's what I did here. Actually got several of them. And I'm just going to mention the artifact names, which I had a lot of fun generating. You know, the city names and cave names and everything. And there's two styles. They're basically like weapon of person name, and then noun, like king or queen or bone, and then like just the most negative noun you can come up with, like agent noun or like slayer or whatever. And, you know, Icefall, Hope Bleed, some of these are pretty cool. And the styling, I kind of was inspired by the artifacts in Caves of Cud, how there's all the like weird coloring and everything. Okay, so if you're going to design a time travel game, you're going to have several issues to deal with, starting with paradoxes. So there's the famous grandfather paradox, which, you know, you go back in time and you're like, well, I want to kill my grandfather, why not? But then you wouldn't have been born, so you wouldn't have time traveled back to kill your grandfather, and now you're in a paradox. So you've got to solve this somehow, and in 7 days, I didn't really want to solve it at all. So option one is parallel universes. So whatever you do in one universe doesn't affect where you came from, so you can't really kill your own grandfather. It's just a different, like, doppelganger grandfather. And the other thing is you have to ignore the previous yous, because if you time travel back, there'll be copies of you. And if you do it enough, you could just generate infinite copies, and then you would have to run those with AI, and that's not something I want to deal with. So just let's pretend that doesn't exist. Option two is like you could actually make paradoxes an important part of the game, and you could say, well, if that happens, you just lose the game. And interestingly enough, there are at least three time travel games this year for 70RL. Timegame from Derrick Creamer, who we already heard about yesterday, and Chronomaniac by Elliot Bonneville, and they were pretty well rated, so you should check them out. And I think they specifically have to do with paradoxes, so that's cool. And this is completely random, but this is what you find reading the Wikipedia page on time travel, is the expanded Novikov self-consistency principle. And the principle basically, the basic one says, time travel works because you can't do anything that would break time travel. So like you can't go and kill your grandfather, it just wouldn't be able to. It's like in movies when people try to do something, change the past, and they just can't do it. So that's the basic version. Expanded I found kind of interesting. Seth Lloyd and other researchers at MIT have proposed an expanded version of the Novikov principle, according to which probability bends to prevent paradoxes from occurring. Outcomes become stranger as one approaches a forbidden act, as the universe must favor improbable events to prevent impossible ones. If you're looking for like an idea for your next game, I think that should be it, because that's like really cool. So then, you know, this is a simple thing, but you have the issue of fragging. When you time travel, you're no longer in the world, and when you come back, there could be something in your place, like a wall or another NPC or something. So you can either kill the player, or you can kill the thing in the location, which I call time fragging. And that's actually a really easy way to just murder anything in the game if people find out about it. But I decided to leave that in because I think that's less cheesy than just, oh, I'm dead because I'm in a wall or whatever. And then you have kind of the calendar issue. It's not really specific to time travel games, but you know, if you're building a world, you can create your own fictional calendar. So I wanted to have hundreds of years of simulated history at the beginning of the game. And I decided the best granularity for me would be 1 turn equals 1 day. So standard 12 months, at 30 days per month, which is a really common thing in fictional calendars, just make it easy. Like, why don't we have a simpler calendar anyway? 360 days per year, and interestingly enough, resting to full HP takes a whole year, or can take about that long, which is, maybe that's a little bit of realism, I'm not sure. And with this approach, you get seasons, but you don't get a day-night cycle, which admittedly, I love me a day-night cycle, and it's kind of sad. This slide is supposed to be a GIF, but it's not animated. So we're gonna go over to the game to look at a few things. Okay, so let me try time traveling. I know this is just jumping in the middle of, with no context, but this is me time traveling in a city. And the city is being built from the ground up from like year 0 to year 300. And yeah, I think with all the streaming and everything, it's running a little bit slower than it would normally. But that's the idea. The NPCs are just building the city, the walls, and everything from nothing. And those people that are there, they will die, have children, and everything. Okay, this is taking a little bit longer than I thought, so I think I'm just going to close this slide since we've already got it built. Please.
I see. Hold on.
No, it's fine.
No, because
am I not like?
control from OBS. You're not trying to.
Oh, I'm like 50 pixels off on this other screen.
Yeah.
But we're like almost there. Like, do we want to just wait?
Yeah.
Okay.
266. There we go.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna blame Google on this one.
Yep.
Do you think time traveling is easy?
I mean, it was easy for me. So
There you go.
maybe you'll kind of see. I just wanted to show the seasons. Obviously, it's the 15th of Echelon, so it's like I don't know, fall. I made up month names. That may not be a good idea. So when you wait about like 120 days, so like a season. So then you get spring. You get these like psychedelic flowers for some reason, and then summer. They're kind of like spring, summer, fall, winter. So that kind of takes the place of the gifts that were not working. So we'll go, no, I'm 50 pixels off again. Okay. And, okay, cool. Okay. I'm going to skip that. So I tried to find a little bit of information on existing games and their designs, and I found a little bit about Braid just afterwards. He gave a great GDC talk about his design for that, and his solution is just save the entire world state, like the whole level, all the positions of everything on every frame. And there's 60 frames per second, and you can rewind like for an hour or something. So that's kind of crazy. So the way he accomplishes that is with compression that he describes similar to video encoding. So you have keyframes, and then the difference within the keyframes is like the difference of position between every 2 seconds. And he also considered a few alternatives like reversible events, but that was a huge pain to design, and interpolation, which I don't think is just not good enough for like a real-time physics platformer. And the game also has deterministic particles, which is interesting. Like if you watch the game, there's these like floaty like stuff, and then you go in reverse and it rewinds. And none of that's stored. It's all calculated deterministically. He's actually written some blog posts recently about how hard it was to make that look random, because if you use a really simple, what's the name, linear congruential generator or whatever, you get really bad randomness. And so apparently he revisited that lately. Okay, so the naive approach to doing this in my game is like, well, let's just save the world like on every turn. And what's wrong with that? Well, when the game starts, there's like 180,000 turns that have already been simulated. And let's just conservatively say like each turn would be like a megabyte. It'd be like 180 gigabytes, and that's not going to work. So instead, we'll just save every change, and we'll save it separately. And everything's going to be a stack. So like a monster doesn't have an HP variable. They have an HP stack, and you just push new HP values on. Or I like to call it a log for various reasons. But so an NPC will have like a position log, and that will only change whenever their position changes. They'll have HP log and a generic event log for like when they got married or had a child. And I also considered something similar to interpolation. I thought, well, okay, 180,000 turns, the performance might be awful. So what if I just simulate at 5-year intervals and say, well, the NPCs all did something in those last 5 years, and I can just assign a date to it. I think this might be like an intractable problem just intuitively, because it's like, well, they might have to pathfind somewhere, and what if they were blocked in that time? Like, you may not be able to figure out if they could actually accomplish that in any less time than it would take to just simulate the whole damn thing, which is what I ended up doing. So this is about how you kind of get into the like nitty-gritty of implementing forward and backwards time travel. Forward is really easy. It's just like in a game when you have a game loop and you just run like the tick or the game loop. You just keep doing that until you get to the right date. It's exactly like playing the game, except the player's not in the game. They're removed from the world, like I mentioned earlier. And the performance just depends on how far you go. So if you go a day, it's like instant. If you go hundreds of years, it takes a while. And this is from, luckily I didn't use a GIF here, I just used 5 slides copied. In the game there's 4 races/civilizations, and they fight each other and they expand their territory. So this is kind of what it looks like over the course of several hundred years. Backwards time travel is like a little bit more interesting. That since everything is a stack in the game, we just take all these stacks and we just truncate all of the future events. And to do that, you just binary search. So we're looking for the last change on each stack, and that's the new kind of current world state. Performance is not necessarily constant, but it kind of appears constant, and it's a lot better than the really far future forward time travel that you get. So just a quick example. Let's say there's a monster, and it starts out with 4 HP at the beginning of time. And we hit it with a sword or whatever at turn 1000. And then maybe we miss, and we hit it again at turn 1002. Same thing, we miss, we hit, we kill it. So it's dead from now on, and then we want to time travel back to 1003. But you can kind of see like what it's going to be, but just for the algorithm, all we got to do is a binary search. I tried to label this as best as I could, but we're looking for the condition where the pointer we're looking at needs to be in the future, and the one before that needs to be in the past, so we can just cut everything off that's in the future. So in this, we don't find this condition met because 1002 is in the past compared to 1003. So we need to search the upper half of the stack. So we do that. We reset all our min, mats, mid pointers. And this condition is now met because 1004 is in the future and 1002 is in the past. And then we can just truncate everything from that pointer onwards. So, okay, that's not right. But anyway, what was supposed to happen here is the third and fourth element, or 3 and 4, they would just get wiped out. And then the new stack would just have time 0, time 1000, time 1002. And the current state of the world is represented by the new top, which is 1002. The monster has 2 HP. And you have to do that for every single element in the world. So the problem with that is that there's 1.5 million tiles in my game, and there's 1,000 monsters roughly and 500 NPCs. And each one of those tiles has like multiple stacks on it that need to be checked. So that it doesn't really work out of the box. So I made a few concessions. There's only 100 living NPCs at once because the NPC pathfinding is like the most expensive part of the game. Monsters live forever. That's kind of confusing. You could have a game where like monsters bred and reproduced and had offspring, but that would be costly. I'd have to simulate that. I just want to ignore monsters whenever I can. And then I batched NPC actions, so like 9 times out of 10, a day will just be uneventful, and then there'll be an eventful day where people are able to get like married and have children or whatever, or go on an adventure. And I don't think anyone really would ever notice that, but it does significantly improve the performance. And then the most like massively important thing is the dirty log on each floor. So those 1.5 million tiles, I don't want to revisit them to check like the blood. There's actually a stack for blood on the floor, and then there's one for like what the tile is. I don't want to have to check those all the time, so I just keep a dirty log, and if the floor hasn't been changed recently, I can completely ignore that. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, there's 180,000 turns before the game even starts, before you can even play. And that includes territory war simulation on the world map, books being written, NPCs living their lives, going on adventures, the really expensive pathfinding, building things, which you saw earlier, marrying, having children, dying, and that all takes about, on my machine, it takes about 15 seconds to simulate from 0 to 500, which I'm not super happy with. I'd love it if it was 0 seconds, but I'm told Dwarf Fortress takes like multiple minutes, so I'm fine with that. And this was also a GIF, but you've already seen this. Okay, so I had a few implementation issues. I wanted to avoid the butterfly effect. And what I mean here is not that if the player changes something, the future will be changed. If they didn't change anything, I don't want the future to be changed. Like if you went from year 500 to 400, didn't do anything, and came right back, you should be in the same world that you were in before. So I want history to be repeatable. Otherwise, the world's just not like logically coherent. So in order to accomplish this, you have to save RNG state on every turn, and it helps to have multiple RNGs. So like if you attack a monster, that's not going to affect the war simulation or the territory simulation. And visuals, like if the player does something to trigger different visuals from being displayed, I don't want, like moving the mouse, that will change things. I don't want that to affect anything else. So I kept seeing non-repeatability during 70RL, and I was pulling my hair out. This was really bad. I would code for an hour, and then I would spend like 4 hours trying to fix it. Here's a few fixes that kind of came along with this. Always use the correct generator. So you need some seedable random number generator. Never like the default math.random. That's awful. Don't put generation code before seeding the RNG. This is really obvious, but I actually did it a couple times on accident. And this one was really pernicious. So like, in addition to all those stacks, I have some temp variables. So like, I want to know on a floor, like, what are the living monsters or whatever? Well, I'm not going to put that on a stack. I just have a temp array. And when I time travel back, I'll just regenerate it, according to the current state of the world. Well, I did that, and I was still seeing this issue. And it turned out, well, it was the order of the array that matters also, because when I go to pick from that array randomly, it could be different, when I time travel back. So I had, every time I use one of those arrays, I have to resort it, which is kind of a pain. I normally would not recommend testing whatsoever when you're doing 7DRL, like unit testing. Maybe that's controversial, but I think that would be a waste of time. But in this case, I really needed it because I needed to verify that my that history was repeatable. So this test would go forward in time travel forward, then it would go back, then it would go forward, and it have two sequences that it could compare. And it used the debug info and it used the RNG state on every turn. And the test only passes if both of those are completely identical. And if it breaks down, you can see where it broke down. So that saved a lot of time compared to manually going into the log and being like, stepping one thing at a time and trying to figure out where I got this problem. These are some funny things that happened to me. So the NPCs, they all have an item and they all drop it when they die. And hundreds of years of people doing that turns every city into like a landfill. So I had to fix that. I forgot to prevent marriages to the dead. This is not a joke. So when somebody dies in the game, they're not like destroyed and removed. The object isn't removed from the game because if you time travel back, they could still be around. So those objects just keep existing until they'd only get destroyed if they're like no longer born or whatever. Yeah, so I had to put in an extra statement like, if alive, then you can get married. And then my civilizations just kept dying out, which is awful because the whole point of the game is there's supposed to be like 4 of them when you start, and there would just be like 2 or 3. Obviously, not enough babies, but why? It ended up being because no divorce was allowed. Like for the history books, I wanted it to be very simple, and like you have to be a certain age, and you have to get married to have children, and just so I could write all of it down. And I didn't want to code divorce just because laziness. So a reformation was needed. We call this the developer's great matter, and that actually solved it. People could get remarried. Because what the issue was is like a really young person was getting married to someone that's like 100 years old. Like there's no like calculation to see if that's creepy or not. And then the old person dies, and then the young person can't have children for the rest of their life, and that was problematic. So I had some pathfinding issues as well, and this was at like 3 a.m. one night, so in the middle of the challenge. Because you saw earlier, kind of like the goal of the game is like to have NPCs, they're in their city, and they're like, let me go on this huge adventure, and they go all the way across the world map. And all that has to be, it's mostly open, there's obstacles or whatever, but I have to do pathfinding for that. And we talked about A-Star a little bit yesterday, so you expect A-Star to maybe be like, okay, you're going to do 1,000 tiles away. It's going to take maybe like, I don't know, 4,000 or 8,000 checks, like on the order of that, like something like 10,000. Why would it take any longer? A-Star was visiting 4 million tiles for every pathfinding event, which is really bad, especially when I'm trying to get that performance. And this is kind of what it looked like. So I'm trying to get like from the blue square to the green square on the right. And the purple line is the final path that it finds. The gray is everything it checks, and it even goes off the screen. It's this just giant diamond. And this actually ties back into something I think Brett was talking about yesterday, is like, you see, like, why is it going down and coming back up? Why is that allowed? Is because with diagonal movement, that's just going all the way up there and coming back down is just as fast as what it does in the purple. Every part of this gray diamond is part of an optimal path to get there. So it just checks all of them. So there's 2 solutions. You can do a Euclidean distance measure for A-Star, or you can just tie break, so you can kind of favor stuff closer to the goal, which is what I ended up doing. And this was kind of a big moment for me after the challenge. I've always been terrified of submitting to open source because I didn't know where I would start, and I've heard all these horror stories that usually involve Linus Torvalds, yelling at somebody. And so but I thought I had something nice to contribute because I went from this to this with a couple lines of code. And I did a pull request into rot.js, and it was accepted in April. So that was my first pull request. That was kind of... I hope you'll agree this is an appropriate use of this image. Primer, please, if you haven't seen Primer, please see it. It's the best movie of all time if you like time travel. Primer is hopelessly confusing and grows more and more Byzantine as it unravels. I've watched it 7 or 8 times and I still don't know what happened. Achron. So there's Chris Hazard, who he actually went to my alma mater, so that's cool. Go Wolfpack. He made this massive time travel multiplayer RTS style game, and it's really cool and everything, but apparently it's massively confusing and had like a 54 on Metacritic. And I think that's kind of part of the issue. I've never exerted so much effort in trying to understand a video game. After watching hours of matches and tutorials on YouTube, reading through the game's wiki guide, and replaying missions up to 5 times each, I finally grasped Achron's time travel mechanic. So that sounds painful. And the thing is, this guy, Chris Hazard, I saw at GDC this year, he was part of the experimental gameplay workshop. And he is working on a new game called Plosh. And the idea behind this is it's like a time travel Bomberman. Has anyone seen this? Okay, and did you understand it?
I had to ask like over 4 beers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would have been, I need to get the 4 beers with Chris Hazard. That would be good. But I watched the video of Plosh, which is supposed to be simplifying time travel. And I watched this multiple times, and it made no sense. So that's kind of the starting point, is this is just really hard. These are kind of the problems I had, and it all stems from my kind of concept of what time travel is and the concept that the player has, and there's a gap. It just doesn't line up. So learn helplessness. People with time travel, it wouldn't help them, and then they would just give up on it for the rest of the game and not be able to win. So a really common thing that would happen is a player is like in a cave and they're fighting monsters, and they like, okay, I'm about to die. Let me time travel forward like a few months, and then the monsters will be gone. And I'm thinking, these monsters live in the cave, bro. Like, what do you think is going to happen? So that's not their fault, but obviously it's like a difference of the way we conceptualize that. So the monsters are like still there when they time travel, and it sucks. Almost no one could follow the clues to win. I mean, I think this is a problem with anyone who makes a game. It's just much easier for the developer than the player. And very few people figured out the combat usages. Like, you can run away from a monster, and then you can just time travel back a month, and then the monster's back on the other screen. Or you can time frag them and insta-kill them, and people just didn't think about that. And then we have stuff like this, where Back to the Future has conditioned us all to expect objects we're carrying from the future to reflect changes we're making in the past. No, that's not the way I look at stuff. But someone thought that, like, in the game you're carrying these books, and the books describe what happened, and they're only valid for after a certain time. But, you hold on to them after you time travel all around or whatever. And they thought that the book should be, like, magically updated while you're carrying it to reflect what happened in the past, even though you're time traveling with it. And that's again, it's the difference that just causes confusion. So these are just some random ideas for just trying to make it easier to understand. I hate doing it, but if the player is playing your 70RL, they're not going to, like, NetHack give it 30 years of their life. They're going to give it 30 minutes. And if they can't figure it out, they're going to give up. So just spell things out. Assume the help page won't be read, because it won't be. Assume the message log won't be read, because humans have change blindness and they don't see it. Assume modals will only be partially read, but that's maybe one of the best solutions that I found. And, visualizers or, stuff on the UI that they're looking at on the screen is probably the best. And just make the changes from time travel more impressive, because I think when you time travel back and you have to collect this resource in the game to time travel, and if you don't get some payoff, people are just not going to do it. So you saw earlier the cities being built up from the ground up. I think that's one of the coolest things I added after the challenge. And then also, I think this is cool, you have giant monsters. If you time travel back, they're kind of like megafauna. So, like, you'll have like a little P for like poison frog, and if you time travel back, it will be a big P, and it will do twice as much damage. So that's kind of like a small change. Now, what can you do with everything in this talk? Obviously, you can make an epic time travel game, probably better than mine. I'd like to see people do that in the future. Or you can just add time travel as an ability to your game. That might be a little bit easier. I think that's in Caves of Cud with the precognition mutation, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think there's something similar in Tome. You could also do something like, if you have this whole infrastructure to time travel back, you could also really easily implement replays or undos, like Ernesto, where the last time I checked, you could undo like the whole level. and maybe make more interesting history. Like when you examine a monster, an item, instead of just getting like some boring thing, you get like the log of everything they've done. That's kind of like, with my game in the biography. So you could examine a monster, see everywhere they've gone, every time they've taken damage or whatever, items when they were picked up, when they were created, stuff like that. So that's all I've got. Questions? If you want to see this game or any of my other 7 URLs, you can go there. And that's kind of my personal Twitter and my one that kind of gets more of the game dev stuff typically.
If you talk about back to where you want, like onto your person.
Yeah, you don't kill yourself because you get taken out when you start and then you get put back in.
The whole history. And your actions stay with your player.
Well, if you time travel back, anything you did in the intervening time it no longer would affect anything. But anything you did before that, the world is going to still have its same state.
Right. So, but if you time travel back and you time travel back forward.
Yeah.
Just say forward.
Back to the future. Yeah.
Then the actions
Oh.
that you performed are preserved.
From let's say you go from your.
There should be repeatability to.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But the actions are preserved, but the player character, quote unquote, doesn't really strictly exist in the game anymore.
During that time. Yeah.
I'm confused. Can I ask you a different?
Yeah. Maybe I'm not getting.
So I killed a bunch of guys.
Yeah.
And then I go back to before I killed them, and then I go forward in time. Now I won't be killing them because I'm going to be sitting in a little pod for that new history. Like when I go back, I wipe out my own.
When you go back, those monsters are still alive.
Right.
Because you never killed them. And then if you went forward, yes, you've changed
And they're all
history.
popped off this.
Yeah, so the question was like, are your actions preserved? And I think if that explains the question, if you travel back in time to monsters that you had killed before you killed them and then went forward, yeah, they'll still be alive because you never... Yes.
That's why you can't make duplicates of yourself.
Yes. Well, duplicates would just be a nightmare. I don't think anyone can do that. Noah?
Yeah. Wait, so.
Oh God. Remember, the time travel is confusing.
To belabor this point, did I kill a monster, get experience for it, go back in time, jump to right after I kill the monster, kill it again?
Can you kill a monster and get experience for it and then get the same experience? No, because the game doesn't have experience. Yeah, sorry. Well, it has, yeah, that is exactly why it doesn't have it. It has loot, and you can come back and get the same item again, which isn't any better than the item you already got. So, Evan? Yeah.
I think these questions are going to get very confusing for me to keep this simple. So, when you travel back in time, the time that you're passing through is unwritten. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So, you said that books can become inaccurate. How does that work mechanically? Do you have a way of keeping track of which past parallel world they're from?
So the question is like, what do I do with the books, and when they become invalid? And I quote unquote invalidate them when you go back before they were written. So like I can't write a biography of someone until they're dead. That's part of the game. So if you go back before that book was written, maybe even after they died, then I'll just say it's invalid. And I grayed out in the UI. So you could still read it if you want to, but it may not be valid. And that's not a great UI, but it does something.
Did you think when you were designing this about implementing some paradox-friendly primer style thing where you could go back and lock yourself in the attic or fight different versions of yourself? I just want to hear if you have any thoughts on how to implement that to a game. That's way more.
Do I have any thoughts about primer style, fighting yourself, locking yourself in an attic? That sounds like a great conversation for more beer. I don't know, I have no idea. I would say watch Primer and get more confused. Back here.
Do you think weekends were invented so we could have matching to see events in real life?
That actually makes a lot of sense, yeah. So that could be supporting the universe's simulation. Kawa?
No.
Oh, the question. Do I think weekends were created to batch our actions? And yes, they were. Mark?
Cool talk and some cool crazy madness stuff. I fear that I know the answer to this question, but what do you plan to do with the game
Uh,
As a developer, please.
I mean, honestly, that just depends on the interest. I guess the main thing is the combat at this point is really simple. And you get these awesome artifacts, but they're actually just like +5 of the last one of whatever you got. So I'd like to develop it, if I get the time. And, in the back?
So, you said you did not want the butterfly effect, but one of the tropes of time travel is stopping wars or starting wars or affecting broad strokes of history. Can the player affect broad strokes of history? Can they terminate a civilization or no?
Can the player create broad strokes of history? Can they exterminate a civilization? Yes, you can do that. You can wipe out like everything on the map if you had the resources to do that. So that's cool. Just to clarify what I said with the butterfly effect, I didn't want the butterfly effect to happen if you made no change. If you make a change, that's fine. But the problem you have with RNG is like you just call that RNG one time. The whole sequence is off from there. So that's why I want to avoid. Can we have time for one more?
No, it's just a comment.
Okay.
You didn't want a perceptible change to human, because we have this notion of, wait, I didn't kill anyone. Why did time change? Well, you were there. You dislocated air. The particles are.
Yes, I mean that could have been an excuse, and I could have saved like days of the challenge by not. I put that requirement on myself, and I probably shouldn't have, but. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add that it sounds like you can mostly kill in terms of affecting history, and you should definitely be able to have babies.
Okay, that will be on the roadmap.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am just going to pull up the next talk and we'll get right into it. Right, the whole 50 pixel thing.